This is our last hop lecture. It's on hop evaluation, utilization, and calculations. And I am Jared Lindenmuth. Hello. So just an overview of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be focusing, so in the last lectures, we've been focusing more on theoretical knowledge and some practical knowledge too, but this is going to focus more on practical knowledge and what's useful essentially with working with hops. So we're going to start off with different methods that we're going to use to evaluate hops, spend some time examining the utilization of hops, and finish with how to calculate addition of hops and test your hops utilization, keep your beer on track as far as IBUs, alpha acids, and so on. So first, you're gonna want to make a hop site visit. So you're gonna want to, if at all possible, go out to where the hops are being grown and inspect the different lots that are available to you. You want to look for flaws in the hops in the different lots. So lot to lot, you can find a good amount of variation. And you're going to look in the brewer's cut, which we're going to talk about later, that come from those lots to kind of analyze what, in general, that hop lot is like. And your brewing company, whatever you work at, whether it be a big company, a smaller company, or you're starting the company, or even if you're, even as a home brewer, you should do this a little bit, is just set up a sensory team. It can just, if you're home brewing, it can be you and, some of your friends that you'll all teach kind of how to evaluate the hops. But in bigger companies, you'll want to set up a sensory team out of some of the individuals that are trained and more experienced with hops to evaluate and go out and select the hops that you're going to want to use for your company. And so the selection team should be selected, as I said, out of employees from the brewery that you're working at. So you'll want to keep it within the brewery. And you're going to want to select for those who have the best sensory training and can make consistent sensory choices. So that's important. But if you're a new brewery and not really many of the people in your brewery are that trained, you'll want to train them. And if you don't have that, you can start off with just the most experienced members of your brewing staff, and then expand over time to train more members. Find the people that are more sensitive to different aromas and such. But if you don't have a sensory panel developed, you should focus on developing one, developing a sensory program, and focus on consistency between for the sensory panel, that they can consistently pick the same type of choices, the same aroma and such throughout as you expand. So a good size for a selection team is between 4 and 6 people is what is recommended. You could have more, but if you have too few, you can have some problems there. Just having either too close of an opinion or whatnot. Less diversity of smell and ability to smell and such, and think of aroma. Sorry, I have a headache right now. I apologize. But all these people should be trained together, so and all taught the same vocabulary, proper vocabulary for analyzing hops, hops aroma, and different characteristics that you're getting, both good and bad. So there's a list in the book that goes over some different aromas, positive and negative, that you'll find in hops. So you'll want to read through that, and work on the consistency and communication between you guys. So make sure that you can consistently, your like blind test, you can pick the same batch, and communicate why you think that one's the best, and also work on understanding not just the hops, but how the hops are going to interact with the beer. So knowing that dang. What was I going to say? Just if the hops aren't very good, obviously that's an issue, but also hops that are too good, you might not find hops that good again. So you'll want to know if the hops you're getting will be reproducible, so that you can have a consistent product in the future. So what are you selecting for? On pages 124 and 125, the book gives some examples behind some of the philosophy of your selection process, like I mentioned a little bit in the last slide. So yeah, while you're selecting against flaws in the hops and you want a good lot, sometimes you shouldn't choose the best hops, because it's like a rare thing. You won't necessarily find that next season, whereas this good but not as good hops that might be more close to what you're finding every year, you might want to choose that one because you can reproduce it. And after you establish a brand, it's very important to be able to reproduce that and not stray too much from it. Or people like to get used to a certain thing. They like knowing when they go for a certain beer that it's going to taste like that same beer. So hops have a big part to play in that. So when you're evaluating hops, they'll give you a brewer's cut, and that is going to be representative of the lot. It's taken every 50th bale. They take a section out of it for you to examine, and 3 of the sides are going to be cut, and 1 of the sides won't be cut. It'll just be the whole hops kind of pressed. So inspect the uncut side first and look at the whole cones. Look at if they're damaged or whatnot. See if look at it. Are the brown hops? If they're browned a bit, is it from like wind burn, or is it actually mites or something got in it, or damage from the kilning process, something like that. Observe how well the pile is compressed, if it's very compressed, or if it's more spongy, kind of bouncy. And then look at the uncut side, and you'll be able to look and see the lupulin gland, see how much lupulin there is, how much resin and such. And you can also kind of touch it and make sure that the cones, grab a couple cones off, see how well they stay together, if they just fall apart. So when you're looking at the cut sides, if the lupulin glands are darker orange, darker colored, it could indicate oxidization. You kind of want a brighter orange or a yellow color from it, but it also depends on the variety as well. Some varieties just have darker lupulin than other varieties do. Look at the cones, feel for seeds, look for leaves and stems. I've found some leaves and stems and plenty of them before, so that you don't want those. So also feel the brewer's cut, feel it for the moisture that it has and the density. It's gonna be, if it's like more moisture, it's gonna be harder, and it's gonna be kind of like a denser press when you're pressing against it. Whereas samples that are dry or too dry might just fall apart, or they might just kind of, you go to press them, they bounce, kind of, there's too much bounce and there's like breakage. That's also bad. But a good sample should be somewhat firm, but should have a little bit of that bounce when pressed. So let's see, when you're evaluating the hops, the whole cones, you'll want to just take some of the cones from the samples. You'll look for the wind burn, see if there's mites, mildew, aphids, anything that's affecting the color or the aroma of the hops. You'll also want to look at just the color of the hops in general and the size of the hops. Size being an indicator of variety, the shape of it, and all that. Just to check, make sure that it looks like it should. Take some of the undamaged cones off and just smell them. See, that's one of the best times to just see if you can smell any off aromas, since you haven't released most of the aromatic compounds that are inside of it. And so you're going to take those cones now and just gently rub them in your hands, not breaking, not really damaging the lupulin glands. You can set those aside now that your hands have kind of been prepped to go, and just do that again with some hops and smell it. Just get it and kind of smell it in your hands. And just enough to start kind of damaging the glands, but not really opening them all up. And smell it. And now, since just a little bit's out and it's been rubbed and heated up a little bit in your hands, some of the grassy aromas can be present now, and you can get some of that, like myrcene and some other things just coming off at that point in time, since it's more volatile. And then you'll take that sample and you'll really rub it up, have it fall apart in your hands, and they're going to be all like yellow and such. It's really nice though. It smells really good. And they'll be covered in resin, so you'll just smell that, and you can really get the aromas and just most of the aroma just hits you a lot. And then you can just let your hands kind of warm up for a little bit, and then smell it again once everything's warmed up, and see how the sample changes as you heat it up, what you're getting from it, how it has changed. Oh, oopsie. Yeah, so I forgot to move to this. So this is everything I just said, and I'll give you a moment to just to look at that. So, okay. So now, ouch. So now when you're evaluating the hops, coming to the decision that you're trying to come to, you should both assess them to yourself. Do you like them? Are these enjoyable aromas? Is there something wrong with it? Now you should also discuss the aromas with the other people in the hop selection team. See what they were getting, what aromas they were seeing, and how they thought of it. And make notes when you're doing some of this can really help, and you can all kind of compare the notes that you're seeing, what flavors you're seeing, what aromas you're getting. And then from there you'll determine which of the hop lots best meet your needs. So this one is outstanding, but we might never find this same flavor again, and we're a bigger brewery, so we might not go with that one. We'll just go with this good one. Or we're a smaller brewery, we don't need it to be a big thing every year. This could just be a one-off or something like that. We'll take this a lot. I mean, we'll take some from this lot, and use it because it is the best, and we're not worried as much about reproducibility, that sort of thing. And so you can review the analytical data, and also it can help to get some, it can help to get some analytical data in addition to your sensory data so you can make the right decision. So is this lot have the alpha acid level that it should? Is it low? Is it higher? What is it saying that it has in it? If it has a lot of myrcene and you don't want a lot of myrcene, then it might be fine because a lot of that might go away when you boil it. So those are things to consider, and we're going to look more at how to evaluate the hops through using them, so or processing them in a way. So you can make teas. So this is a method that not everybody necessarily likes a lot, but it is a method that you can go with. Certain things don't really get they don't interact the same way that they might in a beer, but you can still glean some stuff out of making some teas. So it can help you evaluate the aromas that you're getting from it. And you can boil a liter of water and add a certain quantity of hops, whatever quantity you decide. Just try to standardize it each time you do this, and allow those hops to boil. Letting it boil for a long time, the myrcene's going to go, and some of the other oils might go, which will be similar to a kettle boil. But you can smell it throughout the process, and then it should be changing based on what's leaving and what's still in there. If you're using these hops for aroma hops, or in the late or whirlpool, you might use just hot water, not boiling water, and just let it sit for 10 to 15 minutes like a late hop addition, and then you can evaluate how it's going to be when it goes into the whirlpool or when it goes into the beer or into the wort before yeast is added. And so, yeah, this method has received a bit of criticism for not really emulating. It doesn't even emulate necessarily just the wort plus the hops, but it also doesn't get the impact from the yeast modifying some of those compounds, and like those glycosides, the aromatic attached glycosides won't really be present if you don't have a fermentation. So what some people are doing, they'll be evaluating the hops with small batches. They'll just make small pilot. They'll use a small pilot system and just make a bunch of batches of the same beer, the same wort, just with the different hops from the different lots. And by doing this, just single malt, just smash beers, in small batches, they can understand pretty well how this hop is going to behave in the beer with the yeast and with the wort and such, so that you can really compare better. So yeah, the best utilization of your hops is going to really depend on the variety of hops and the style of beer that you're making. In general, the amount and the timing are really important factors to take consideration of, and we'll be talking a lot about timing and how that impacts the flavor coming up. Some other very important factors to consider are how efficient your kettle is, the form of the hops that you're using, whether it's the whole cones or the pellets or extract, and what the gravity of the wort is can affects how much utilization of alpha acids you're getting. The boil temperature and the pH both have an impact, and the composition of the hops themselves, how much alpha acids they have, how much oils and such they have, and what oils you're getting, and so on. So we talked a little bit about it before, but the mash hopping, so not all the hops additions are concerned solely with alpha acids. When you're mash hopping, you're looking more to improve the overall flavor by giving it that kettle hop flavor, which you're going to get from increasing the hop glycosides, which your yeast is going to convert during fermentation. And this is going to provide more depth to your beers, especially more moderately hopped beers that aren't really being overpowered by the rest of the hops. But you can also get it in IPAs as well. It can be a background sort of tone that adds depth to the beer. And so these glycosides are desirable for mash hopping, or for mash hopping are found in the vegetative part of the hops. The kettle hop flavor, as I had mentioned. But you can't get this through CO2 extracts, so that's an important thing to keep in mind. And it's also limited in the type of pellet you're using. Say 45, type 45 pellets are going to have a lot less of this particular compound than the type 90 will. The type 90 should have much more in it. But also keep in mind not to, if you use too much, you can just get it to have a very vegetative, vegetal, grassy type notes in it too, chlorophyll type flavor. So over mash hopping can be bad as well, just as over hopping can be bad too. So now we'll look at the timings after the mash hopping. So most hops are typically added during the boil, and the longer the boil, the more increase of alpha acid utilization or alpha acid conversion to isoalpha acids that you'll get. So the boil is broken down usually in 30 to 15 minute increments that you'll think about as you're going, especially near the beginning. It could be, if it's a 90-minute IPA or a 60-minute IPA, you'll go down maybe 15 or 30-minute increments, and then near the end, near 15 minutes, it can go down to increments of 5 minutes that you'll just in your mind or on paper break down into smaller increments for more aroma hop use. Just adding something to get more aroma out of it. So the length of the boil is typically no shorter than 60 minutes, typically at least 60 minutes. Some can go as long as 120 minutes or more even. So the principle behind adding hops near the beginning of the boil is that these are usually exclusively being used as bittering hops, though you can use some aroma hops to get more depth, as I said before, with the kettle addition hops. This can give you certain other flavors, other bittering substances that you don't find as much in just the what's considered bittering hops just by themselves. The longer the boil, the more of the alpha acids will become isomerized and become soluble in the wort. So if you put them in the beginning, you're getting most all of them out at the end of the boil, and nearly all of the hop oils will be lost at this addition. So even though you added some of those aroma hops, a lot of the oils will have gone away by then. The late addition, usually within the last 15 minutes, and adding hops at this point is mostly for aroma. So you usually use aroma hops at this point, though you don't, as I said before, it's all just up to you and what you decide that you want to try to make the best beer you can. So so the hop oils, which are sensitive to being evaporated, being vaporized essentially, in in the wort from like the early. So before, when we were just adding it to the beginning of the additions, you'd lose all these, but now you won't lose as many because there's less boil time and they won't have as much time to volatilize and leave. And so many of the aroma hops have lower alpha acids, so they tend to not have as much impact on the bitterness of the beer. It's more just focused on flavor at this point. So yeah, often there can be 2 or 3 additions. So there's going to be one at the beginning for bitterness, and some aroma hops can be added at the beginning as well, and one near the end, or there can be a couple staged a little bit before the end, so you could have it just multiple staged out. Another method that can be used is hopping the beer continuously throughout the beer. Continuous additions to the wort throughout the boil, so you can get all the different nuances. It's like a layered approach. It gives it more depth, and there's a full integration of those flavors together than with just 2 additions. So post-boil, you can add some, and this will further develop the aroma. So you can use hopbacks or whirlpools, or put it in the whirlpool to further develop this aroma that you want from these aroma hops typically. And it can also help enhance the actual brewing process. So similar to the late boil additions, the aromatic compounds from these are not going to be lost as much, so you're going to get a lot more of these in your wort going forward. So with hopbacks, the addition of hops adds the aroma, but it also helps create the hotbed from which you'll strain the wort through. So it'll help keep that stuff out from going into the fermentation. Same with whirlpools. The aroma will come out, and you'll get a greater utilization of those alpha acids as well in it, so you can have a bit of an increase in alpha acids even at that stage with that. So the longer post-boil hops can have negative and positive attributes to it. As I've said several times now, just too long essentially with hops in the wort or in the beer is going to add grassy chlorophyll type flavors, especially with particular varieties of hops. But the longer it's in there, you'll also extract more of the other aroma oils and flavors that in the wort, and even increase the perceived bitterness, even when compared with just dry hopping at the end. So it's still hot, it's still warm in there, so it's still extracting some more aroma compounds and such than with dry hopping, especially if you dry hop cold. So let's go on to dry hopping now. It's become a pretty common procedure now. A lot of places dry hop, and it's a fairly new practice, and you're going to add these hops post fermentation into your fermenter, and it varies how each brewery does it from brewery to brewery, and based on what a lot of things are going to change based on what variety you're dry hopping with, the form of the hops that you're using, whether it be pellets or whole cones, the tank temperature you're using, the tank geometry, and so on. So the form of the hops is really important. The whole cones, as we talked about in the flavor section, the flavor lecture that we did, they're typically, or not the flavor, the products, the hop products lecture. We talked about how the hop cones are typically perceived as having a better aroma than the pellets are, but as far as how much aroma and the amount of time that's required to get these compounds out, the pellets are usually better at extracting these aromas faster, whereas the whole cones can give you some grassy flavors, and they won't extract quite as fast as the pellets will. But originally, pellets weren't an option, and you could only really use whole cones. So some brewers, either just through philosophy or just through that's what they've done in the past, have stuck with whole cones. But a lot of places have started using pellets, and that's made the process better for a lot of different breweries. So the temperature is also important to consider when you're dry hopping. The higher temperatures will extract things faster, and if you're on a deadline or you really need to get these beers out faster, I should say, then to keep up with production, you might choose to do this, but you might end up extracting unwanted vegetal notes and such from these hops. If you do it at colder temperatures, you won't extract those flavor compounds, and you can reduce. I mean, it'll take longer to extract the compounds, but you won't get as many off flavors from it. You can keep that in check. Which choice you go up to is really up to you, but and up to the needs of your company, but you should take more care if you are going to be using higher temperatures. So in addition to the temperature, the presence and activity of the type of yeast that you're using is important. And you may, and as we said before, the yeast interact with a lot of these compounds and change them. So you may choose that you want that and keep the yeast in there and active, or when you're cooling the tank down, if you cool it down, you can dump off that yeast and then dry hop. And you can avoid getting a lot of change from the yeast. So the quantity of hops is important as well. So how much hops you're using can be as important as some of these other things, as some of these other issues. Sometimes adding less hops can actually impact the beer more than adding more hops can, in a better way at least. Some things are better expressed if you use less and worse expressed if you use more. Some of the other flavors can kind of overcome that flavor that you're looking for, so you should keep that in mind as well as you're going forward. Next, we're going to calculate hops. We're going to kind of go into some considerations when you're calculating how much hops you need. But most of them are going to center around targeting the IBUs that you want. So how bitter you want your beer. So the term utilization that we've been talking about is typically referring to achieving a certain level of isoalpha acids, which is essentially the amount of IBUs in the beer. So calculating and testing the IBUs over time can help you achieve your desired bitterness and keep it in check, keep your beer consistent over time. And if your beer is losing consistency, if your mouth is interpreting things different than it used to, you become more accustomed to hops and bitterness and lupulin and so on. You can have a lupulin threshold shift, which is just the same amount of bitterness, just doesn't do it as much for you anymore. And what you perceive as bitter becomes, you need more to get that same sense. So if that's happening, you might start adding more hops just because you think, oh, it doesn't taste as bitter as it used to. I need to add more hops to make up for that. But other people that haven't been drinking it like you might not have had this drift, and they might say, oh, wow, this is really much bitter than I remember it the last time that I had it. So you'll want to keep that in mind as well. So some of the factors that you're going to look at when you're calculating is it goes into utilization, as I said before, but the form of the hops that you're using, whether it's pellets or cones. Pellets, you're expecting 10 to 15% more alpha or isoalpha acids to be extracted than with cones. The longer boil time that you do, depending on how long it is and when you're putting it in the boil, can cause it'll put you at, the longer you've boiled it, the more alpha acids you're going to get, whereas shorter you're not going to get as many. But over boiling them for too long can actually start breaking down some of those alpha acids into other kind of flavors that aren't undesirable typically. The geometry of the kettle can greatly change the efficiency. You can find a lot different efficiency from smaller systems to larger systems, and just the drastic change of this can make a recipe going from a 5-barrel tank to a 30-barrel brew house or whatnot have a large difference of their efficiency. So you'll have to change the recipe for that to get it back to where you want for now brewing at that larger volume. So a couple of the simple equations are given in your book, and you're going to want to look at those and just understand them. So when determining the hop utilization, this is essentially I couldn't copy it and put it in here, so you'll look at your book and I'll explain it now. It's just the utilization is equal to the amount of isoalpha acids that are actually converted from the total amount of alpha acids added to your wort based on how much hops you added with what percent alpha acids they had. So the utilization is how many of those were converted to isoalpha acids. And to calculate IBUs, you're going to take the quantity of hops added multiplied by the alpha acids, and then the level of utilization that you were getting times 0.749, which is a constant that they give, and divide all of that by the overall volume of the beer that you have. So calculating IBUs, so continuing on. So the hop calculations often don't take in everything into account, so you'll have to probably revise it over time based on what you're seeing, and from like lab results and such, you might have to make an adjustment. So to check the IBUs, there's some different analytical ways you can go about it. You can use HPLC. If you send it out, you probably won't have one of these in your lab. Liquid chromatography, it's expensive, so most labs, unless you're in a really big company, won't have one. A more likely way will be with spectrophotometer, which isn't quite as accurate, but it's pretty good. And so to simplify this process, I'll just walk you through it real quick. For checking it, you can look at the ASBC website. if you have a membership, you can get a membership and find a lot of their different methods for things. But in the beer, you'll add like 10 mils of the beer to 20 mils of solvent with a little, like 1 mil of some 3 molar acid, and you'll mix that up and centrifuge it down, and that'll extract the alpha acids into the solvent. And then you'll put that into the spectrophotometer and examine it at a wavelength of 275 nanometers, which is what the alpha acids are going to absorb the light at that frequency. And based on that multiplied by 50, that's the empirical way that you can find out your IBUs. So once you know your IBUs, you can go back and see if that's what you calculated, and if it isn't, then you can go and back and try to adjust what your calculation, what your equation is for calculating IBUs. Bitterness, the bitterness of the beer is not just the level of the IBUs present, but high IBUs, high IBUs alone don't mean that you're going to see it as bitter. I don't know if what did I just, sorry. So there's essentially other components present that affect bitterness. It's not just the IBUs, not just the alpha acids, though those are the major component. The residual sugars in it, if you have a lower residual sugar, that beer can appear more bitter than if you have a higher finishing gravity, final gravity, because the higher gravity will make it sweeter, kind of offset the bitterness. There's other bittering agents in the hops that can affect the bitterness of the beer, and the pH itself can also affect your perception of the bitterness. So, and lastly, break the rules. You can, there's a lot of rules that we talk about, a lot of things that you hear online, but you don't always have to go with those. There's plenty of people that have used like what were considered not bittering hops for bittering hops, and used things that are considered bittering hops as non-bittering hops, as aroma hops and so on. So just because people say that it's for that, it doesn't need to be for that. You can be creative. Hops are great, and you can really try to utilize them in different ways to see what's best for you. So ultimately, just figure it out, and thank you for listening to these hops lectures. This is my last lecture, so I will see you guys later.